Welcome to another edition of the More You Know Co. podcast that's all about the people and places of Northern Colorado. Today we have Shadrach Rice with Scrap Wanted on the show talking about recycling and other fascinating things. Welcome aboard.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, our pleasure, our pleasure. So tell us a little bit about your company and how it got started.
I do scrap metal recycling. I have worked in this industry for, I don't know, it's going on 20 plus years at this point. My dad first started having me take apart electronic equipment that he couldn't sell.
Really?
And then from there, it just kind of blossomed into its own line of work. And I've, over the years, have done some pretty interesting things that have caught my interest and kept me going. I like to say I'm an equal opportunity scrapper. So it's never a job too big or too small that I'm not willing to look at and explore how to get rid of it in one form or another. So there's never a dull day around my life, usually.
I'll bet that's very true. That's very true. And you have a really unique business plan as far as from what I've seen. So, you know, most junk haulers and so forth is a little different of an animal. Mm-hmm. So they're going to come in and they're just going to pick up everything and haul it away and charge you a flat fee.
Yes, a lot of junk haulers do that.
Right, and they're not looking at what's recyclable, what's not. And you really, you're very conscientious about recycling everything that you possibly can, and then the credits and so forth. Tell us a little bit about how that works.
Well, I really like to come from the perspective that everything has a new home. You just got to find it. So a lot of times when I'm looking at a job, I'm trying to very much minimize what goes to the landfill, just because not only I feel it's the right thing to do, but it's my nature as well. It's the way I was brought up. You know, we had all kinds of stuff that people threw away, and we were trying to find new homes for it. And so over the years, that's just kind of what I did. So of late, there's a lot of stuff that gets thrown away that still has a good, useful life, but it's cheaper to buy new. I run into this on a lot of, especially with the larger companies. Between liability and things of that nature, it's just easier to throw it away or recycle it than to refurb or reuse or inventory to reuse at some point. Sure. So they just want to get that credit for recycling and then move on to something new or better or safer or whatever the case may be.
Right.
So, yeah.
Interesting. So how do you make money in recycling? I mean, where's the
well,
money?
And I get that question a lot, and I look at metals very differently than a lot of people do, because at the scrapyard you get paid as soon as you deliver that metal. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, if I have a pound of steel, that to me looks like so many cents. And so when I take that to the scrapyard, it gets taken off my trailer, and I get a tare weight, and then I get paid on the paid weight, the net weight. And that is where I make the money. And so metals have value, no matter what form they're in. Basically, metals have value,
sure.
Simply speaking anyway. And so volume is the name of the game. And then from there, it just get it to the yard, get it processed into the size that the scrapyard can deal with it, or safely transport is usually what it comes down to.
Right.
And so I'm getting paid at the scrapyard because metals are worth money. I mean, our entire economy is based upon COMEX and getting the raw material to build things.
Right.
And so we either going to dig it out of the ground, or we're going to use whatever we have.
Right.
The raw materials that we have. So from that standpoint, when I do wind up going to the landfill, I'm always freshly amazed at what's lying in the landfill, because that stuff, it has a very easy home to go to be reused, whether it's being melted down or resold.
Right.
You know, I've been to the landfill and I've seen a end dump full of telephone poles. Well, whoever loaded that did not understand about copper value and wound up putting hundreds of pounds of copper wire
Oh wow, yeah.
into the mix in with that in those telephone poles. And I have sit there and scratched my head like, why didn't you at least go buy your own house and pitch that stuff out?
Yeah.
And I've seen that a lot when I've gone to the landfills where for whatever reason they've mixed stuff in that it's like, well, I would have gone by my house with that load. And,
Yeah, there's some chunks of value
yes,
in that, right?
Very much so, especially with where copper prices are these days. So
Yeah, I'd imagine copper's doing pretty well. And I think most metals kind of are. I mean, as far as there's just, if you look at what they cost to mine and how dirty it is to mine stuff.
Oh, yes.
Versus a lot of the recycling and so forth. And of course, there's huge pushes out there to be recycling everything that we can. Our city council in Fort Collins mandated larger recycle bins, hoping that would spur more recycling. And I don't know if that's spurring the recycling of the right materials that are really helpful. Where you're right, you go out to the landfill, you look around, and there's a lot of stuff just laying there, or a lot of hidden, materials out there that you just don't know. Like there's a reason a hide-a-bed weighs so much.
Oh yes, yes. I have not personally scrapped a hide-a-bed because I tend to not want to move them, but I think it's possible. I think the scrapyard would not reject you if you brought a hide-a-bed couch in.
Yeah.
I mean, by weight is usually what I tell people. As long as it's 60% metal by weight, it can be recycled.
Oh, interesting.
And I go back to like appliances. A lot of times appliances are a lot of plastic involved.
Sure.
Especially like a dishwasher, and they accept dishwashers all day long.
Yeah, and that's all that whole cartridge, everything inside that's plastic.
But they're going to look at it as a kind of to balance it out as well, because there's also an electric motor in there. They've got a pump. So that copper value is going to offset some of that plastic value, or what they call fluff.
Sure.
That kind of thing where there's there's a lot of trash in there.
Fluff.
Fluff.
I like that. Fluff.
Yeah, that's what the shredders call it. After they've run it through an eddy current and a magnet, they've pulled all the metal out. They have fluff left.
Oh, okay.
And I've seen that fluff being used as road base at the landfills. I always hope their magnet was working good that day. Because I'm driving on fluff.
New tires.
Yeah, we could new tires, but. There's a lot of fluff. You think about, especially in modern cars, how much plastic is on that stuff.
Yeah.
And they are, they grind that whole thing up and they pull the metals off, and they do the fluff as leftovers.
So that's pretty much what they do. They just take a car and you see them crushed down and so forth, and they grind them.
Yeah.
And then they pull off all the metal using a magnet.
Yeah, a magnet and an eddy current. The eddy current's kind of cool. I've not personally seen it work.
I don't know what that is. Tell me what an eddy current is.
Well, an eddy current is going to take an electromagnetic field and it's going to repel the non-ferrous. So they're going to run it through a magnet. I do believe the magnet comes first. And that's very simple. They just have a conveyor up against the magnet and all the steel levitates.
I think I've seen that, where it just pops right up to the magnet.
And then it goes to the eddy current. And the eddy current, from what I understand, it works from the underside and does the same thing, only it levitates it out. It repels the non-ferrous. And I don't know how small of a piece they can get, but they can get pretty small. I've seen their pile. It's pretty impressive. I mean, there's pieces the size of a toothpick of non-ferrous copper, aluminum, primarily brass, stainless, stuff like that. And they run that through their eddy current, and now you basically have plastic and foam and everything else you can imagine. Fluff.
Yes.
And they ship that. And some of the recyclers in Denver, I know all recycling that I use, they actually ship the fluff to another company that does the same thing. They're going to take it to another level, and they're going to pull another level of ferrous and non-ferrous out of that fluff. And now you're really clean. Now, I mean, at that point, I can't imagine what the percentage is that's left, but there is a big push to do that. So there's a whole nother organization right next to the scrapyard that deals with their fluff.
Wow, just to pull out the last of it. So there's a lot of valuable stuff there. I mean, if you think about that compared to the stuff they're just chucking in the landfill has a ton of metal left.
Oh, absolutely.
When you look at landfills soon.
Oh, I believe in my lifetime we'll be mining landfills. I know back here probably 10, 15 years ago, I ran into a fellow recycler, and they were buying landfills from the 30s because they had so many cars.
Oh, sure.
And so they were digging for the cars, and they knew that if they bought a landfill that was open from this period to this period of time, they had 200, 300, 400 cars, whatever they could dig out of the ground.
Sure.
And I believe that we're not too far away before they start start digging for even the plastics, because plastics as a energy source is actually pretty valuable.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
We have the technology to run that kind of stuff through an incinerator and put proper scrubbers and keep it clean.
Right.
I know in Europe they do that. They do quite a bit of that. I lived in Europe for a little while, and we were probably a 10-minute walk away from the local incinerator, and you had no idea.
Right.
It never smelled. It never saw smoke or steam or black smoke billowing from it. So,
right.
And they ran everything. I took many laps around that thing, and around the backside, they had trash coming in, and they had raw material. They had their aggregate, and they had their scrap, and you could tell the scrap was burnt, had gone through a shredder, and they got everything. And so they had 3 commodities basically. They had aggregate, recyclable materials, and then they had their ash.
Sure.
So that technology is out there. The question is whether it's cost effective or not. And landfills I find fascinating from that standpoint of what's in them.
Sure.
Whenever I go there, I'm like a kid in a candy shop. I'm looking around. I'm like, well, in the next 10 years, maybe I'll get the contract to clean this up. Thank you for dumping that load of copper. I'll appreciate that one day. Somebody will appreciate. Yeah, right. That made the balance sheet a little bit better because you dumped that load. So I look at it a little bit different. And I also, like I said, I scratch my head like, why in the world is this coming here? It seems that there's far better uses for it than being dumped and buried. Sure. But, we put a lot of stuff in landfill that can be reused and recycled. It just comes down to whether it's profitable or not.
You would think the plastic thing would be a relatively good solution, just based on the fact that seems to be the big environmental threat that everybody's talking about, is that we have plastic everywhere. Mm-hmm. And if it had some value to go and get turned into energy or something.
Well, and I believe it does. I don't know that if it's 100% profitable yet.
Sure.
But I know clear back in the early 2000s, I was selling plastic, container loads of baled plastic, and I was profitable at it. I haven't sold plastic in a long time, and I know that market is there, but it's still fairly cheap. But and I actually almost don't have a problem with putting some of that stuff in a battery, so to speak. A landfill to me is just a big battery. If we're going to put it in there, let's contain it, let's line it, so we're not polluting a larger area.
Right. Which they do, of course.
Yeah. And then at some point in the future, maybe my son will run that company that is mining landfills. But as a mineral deposit, if you will, in a landfill, that's pretty exciting to me. I mean, that we will get to that at some point.
Sure.
Europe's already there. They've run out of space to put stuff in the ground, so they've been forced to do it. But we'll get there. I recently watched a documentary on a landfill in California that's just absolutely enormous. And all I could think when I was watching that is, that's a captive resource pool that one day will be mined.
Sure. And there's a ton of stuff in there.
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff, especially some of these older landfills where you got cars at the bottom of them. Right, yeah. Especially cars from the 30s. They are heavy. They are fun to scrap. I'd rather scrap a car from the 30s. All your remodelers, sorry, but but usually when I get them, you're done.
There's no restoration
no Bondo
involved.
on this thing anymore. Yeah, but they're way heavier, so they have a lot. They have a lot of minerals in them, if you will.
Sure. That's interesting. Now, scrap recyclers tend to get a bad reputation for some reason. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean,
well, and the reason they get a bad reputation, from what I've seen in my experience, has been that since it kind of goes back to the other question of how do I make money, because it's so quick. They can go steal something off your porch, serial number or no serial number,
right,
and put it in the back of their pickup and go to the scrapyard and dump it and get cash.
Right.
Then that just makes it very attractive. Nobody's pulling a serial number on something. Cars are considerably more difficult, and that's why they've gone to the catalytic converter, because that's the value part of the catalytic converter, and they can rip it off.
We hear that a lot now.
Yes, now, and it's
getting those cut right off.
Yes, cut right off, and there's a lot of people that have come up with some pretty interesting ways to prevent that from happening. welding rebar onto your frame. I dread the exhaust mechanic that needs to go there and fix your cat whenever that happens. But
right.
yes, the cats are really valuable. They're easy to cut off, and they typically don't have a serial number. And so there's a big push to understand and mitigate that as much as possible. And there's signs at all the scrap yards, indicating what is a stolen cat. If somebody comes in with 5 of the identical cats, that's kind of odd. Where did you learn that cat was so valuable? And
right.
why do you have 5 of them?
Right,
so,
right. Good question. Right.
That's a hoop that needs to be jumped through. But from the standpoint that people steal stuff and they can make money so easily.
Sure.
And it's a cash. There's very little regulation on that cache. It's very easy to do.
This is not a training video. This is not a training podcast.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
But no, there's a lot of people out there that have got that concept that metal is money, and
sure.
they go steal it and they turn it in for cash. So. And there's a really good effort to stop that, but the honest fact is that you're just not going to be able to stop all of it.
Right.
And so, there's some rules out there, laws, whatever they're called, that make it difficult, but also there's a way around it. If there's a will, there's a way.
Right.
So,
right.
And unfortunately, a lot of the people that get that have that mindset get all the publicity.
Oh, sure. It probably only takes a couple of those.
Yes.
The whole industry to get a bad name.
You can always tell when copper price is high, because you're going to start seeing stories how things have been stolen.
Right.
And I heard a story back, not recently, but this is back when there was the last big high. People were stealing manhole covers, and I actually saw some manhole covers at the scrapyard one time, and I thought, how much could these actually be worth? Why?
Yeah.
What? And I went and picked one up. I'm like, oh, okay. Well,
They're pretty heavy, yeah.
You get your peddler scrap that's driving down the road. They've already got 300, 400, 500 pounds on there. It's quick another 100 pounds that doesn't even need a strap to hold on. They can tuck it along the side of their wheel.
Yeah, there you go.
So I mean, from that standpoint that metal is money.
Right.
Then it does lend itself to somebody that wants to fly under the radar. They would rather take that and scrap it than deal with trying to a pawn shop or something else. So
sure.
there's definitely theft that happens from that standpoint in there. So, and it gives all of us a bad rap. And then we've all seen those scrappers that have the beat up pickup and the stuff falling off the side, and they've
right.
got 100 bungee cords holding on a ton of scrap. And I see those guys, and it's just like you're just making everybody else's life difficult.
Yeah.
And I've certainly gone around the block, so I didn't have to pass those guys because I know what has fallen off. So yeah, they get that rap because they're not doing what they say they're doing, and they are stealing stuff. And then you've got that. I mean, I had an officer that was doing DOT inspections. He straight up told me, "I love you, scrap haulers. Violations are easy."
Sure, yeah. See one of those come and get a grin.
Yeah. So, that's the big reason that a lot of scrap haulers get a bad name. And what I try and do to distinguish myself from that is I do what I say I'm going to do, and I work really hard not to overpromise. And that's really the name of my success, is that I've always tried to do what I said I'm going to do.
Right.
And that's a rare thing, especially in general these days, and specifically in the scrapyard.
Oh yeah.
Because there's the yards themselves are usually pretty good. I've had very few experiences. Our local yard here, Colorado Iron and Metal, I love Dan and Marty over there. They do a great job. And then Rocky Mountain Recycling down in Commerce City is where I take a lot of my bigger stuff down there. And they are, I've never walked away from them thinking, wow, I just got ripped. There's a couple other scrap yards in town that will remain nameless that I have not had that experience with.
Right.
But the big ones that are legitimately out there they do a good job.
Right.
So
Well, this is a good time to probably hear from our sponsor, which, hey, coincidentally today is Scrap Wanted. So, Shadrach, what can you tell us about you being a sponsor?
Well, I do scrap metal recycling in northern Colorado. For the bigger jobs, I have traveled. I do a lot of farm cleanups and industrial cleanups of all kinds of descriptions. I've gotten into some pretty crazy things. The latest thing that I'm doing now is fluorescent tube recycling in quantity, several hundred or more. And I bought a grinder, and I am doing fluorescent tubes, which is kind of cool to watch that thing work. Those tubes disappear into a 55-gallon drum, 500 to 1,000 at a time. So I'm doing that, and I do estate sales as well. I can do cleanup from just collecting the trash in the backyard clear up to the whole estate and dealing with stuff like that. I do a lot of different stuff along those lines. If you've got something that needs to be getting rid of, I can probably find the best way of getting rid of it. Sometimes there's a fee involved in that, but most of the time, especially on the quantities, I can usually get rid of it for free. Or in some cases, my goal is to even pay you for it. And
because of the scrap prices.
Scrap prices, and especially right now, we did have a dip. Scrap prices are very volatile, and we did have a dip in January. But overall, they're very reasonable.
So a big cleanup job that rather than bringing in some just junk hauler that's just going to haul it all, you'd love to look at those and be able to recycle what you can and do it environmentally and then credit back and towards your labor and keep it a little more inexpensive as well.
I did a very large cleanup down in Commerce City. It was 2 acres. He had a $30,000 trash bill out of that thing. I was running multiple semis on multiple days to end dumps to the landfill, and I was still able to give him a check because the guy was able to. He was able to store enough stuff. I also pulled 100 tons of scrap off of his place in 2 acres. That was impressive. He still holds a record, but apparently it was the second time he cleaned up as well. So
very good. He had already made one pass.
Yes, he was the dollar guy at an auction. Those guys are nice. I like those guys. They have enough junk to pay for the trash usually.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of opportunity when you value the scrap. There's a lot of the junk haulers that want to come in and charge $300, $400, $500 to pick up the small, and I always wonder how their business model has got such traction. You see them all over the place, and more power to it if somebody can build their own business and build that model. But when I look at it, it's like I think you're taking advantage of the fact that somebody doesn't necessarily understand what they actually have.
Right. Yeah, they just see a pile of junk. They don't see that there's some value in it if they just go to the scrapyard with it. Because, which kind of brings us to what exactly is recyclable and what isn't. So when you're cleaning up stuff and so forth, what items are you looking at saying, well, that's got value that we might not see? So
what has value? Almost anything that has a high percentage of metal, 60% of metal is the scrapyard is going to take. The conversation that I have a lot is if you look at a car, like we spoke earlier, it's got a lot of plastic in it. The industry has very well established how to deal with that. They run it through a shredder, and so as long as the metal is shreddable, so to speak, it can pretty much be recycled as long as the weight is there to offset the cost of getting rid of all of the fluff. Individual items, microwaves, all appliances, but even some toys. A lot of toys have electric motors in them now.
Sure.
A lot of stuff. Certainly, if you feel the heft to it, if you can pick it up and say, this isn't all plastic, then chances are it can be recycled. I was doing an estate cleanup, and I was looking through some stuff they were bringing out of the house, and like a baby swing, that's pretty much all metal. I'm like, let's pitch that in there. It doesn't weigh a whole lot, but it's all metal. So there's a lot of stuff like that if you look at it, well, what percentage of this is metal? And even if it is below that 60%, chances are it can still go, because your overall load is going to be better than 60%.
Sure.
And if there's, some other non-ferrous on it, I got into a deal one time where I was getting up product return vacuum cleaners, 90% plastic, but they did have electric motor in there.
Right.
And,
copper.
I called the scrapyard up and I said, hey, I've got 23 pallets of product return vacuum cleaners. And they said, well, yeah. And I said, well, can I stuff it in an RV too and just give it to you? And they said, yeah, that's fine. I said, well, I'm going to cut all the power cords off. I said, yeah, that's fine. So I got 23 pallets of vacuum cleaners and I stuffed them in an RV and cut all the cords off, and I made a couple $100 on the cords, and I took the whole thing down there and I said, here you go. They unloaded it with the forklift, tore the whole thing apart, and shoved it in their shredder. In that case, that resulted in a fee that I had to charge the generator, but it didn't go to the landfill.
Right.
Everything got recycled. Certainly got broke down. The plastic, the fluff that did wind up going to landfill was in a much condensed form.
Right. You've got to have some interesting stories about things that you've recycled in the past. What's the most interesting, oddest thing that you've come across?
Well, I just recently broke my record last week, actually. On the week before last. I just cut up a 45-ton tug, airplane tug. That thing was a beast. I don't even think a tank would have rivaled its weight.
I would imagine those things are pretty heavy. They'd have
and
to
I
be.
forget the model of airplane that it was designed
The thing
to
that
pull.
pulls the airplanes around.
Yeah,
with,
but it's a big airplane it pulls around, and that thing weighed about 83,000 pounds with the tires. And that engine was about 5,000 pounds. So that's my
same
current
as a
record.
normal car.
Yeah, that's my current record, is about 83,000 pounds of scrap metal on one piece.
Right.
It took me 4 days to cut it up. So that was fun, challenging. The single largest piece of metal I scrapped for what was that? An Alice Chalmers Super Crusher. It was a solid piece of cast iron. It weighed 72,000 pounds or so. One piece. I don't know how they casted it.
That is
Certainly
huge.
came back. That thing was probably 30s or 40s vintage, maybe older than that. I don't know. But everything had been stripped off of it to make it as light as possible, and we still had like 72,000 pounds.
Wow, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it was the primary crusher on a crushing site in Wyoming that Martin Marietta now owns, and they dug it out of their on-site landfill to clean up there, and they stuck it up there, and I had to stare at it for about a year and a half before I could figure out how to get everything,
Get it out,
all
yeah.
the gears. We had to wait for the prices to come up.
Sure.
To make everything, all the math work out. Right. But that single piece, I had to have a crane on both ends and a large truck in the middle to get it. So single piece, 72,000 pounds. But I've done a lot of stuff for CSU. I recycled their digester, the big stainless steel digester, out of date.
That's a fascinating piece of equipment, or I guess it was. Yeah.
It was. Well, they replaced it with a more modern electronic controls and stuff. It had a very interesting smell to that whole area.
I bet it did.
But that was 4,000 pounds of stainless steel scrap, and it was costing them more money to run. They got their new one in there, and so that one was time to go. And it was a big. It was a big deal. That took me a couple of days to get out of there, and
that was a big piece. I mean, we're not talking something small, desk size.
That was 4,000 pounds. I mean, I think that tank on that was like 1,000 pounds. Yeah. So they could digest 1,000 pounds at a time with that.
Right.
So, which is another form of recycling too.
There you go. Very true.
It was right up my alley. I was fascinated by the process, and it was. I got to talk to the people that ran that department, and the stories that they could tell.
Oh, I'm sure they have some good ones there. We should get them on the show. What have you digested?
When I was there, I think they had a giraffe coming from the Denver Zoo.
Oh, very.
Not sure what had happened there, but that stuff's got to go somewhere.
That's very true.
Once again, if you can digest it and reduce the size, and
right.
So that was pretty interesting.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. Now, these boulder fires that were just so tragic and so forth, there's a lot of cleanup that's going
Yes.
on there right now. But there's a lot of opportunities for some recycling and,
Yes.
and all of that as well. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, like you said, that's very tragic what happened there. But that's a pretty established cleanup, the way that's going to work. I was actually watching the Zoom meeting that Boulder County had put together, and they're going. I mean, they're doing quite an amazing job of organizing all of that. But there's a lot of recycle. Doing burnt cleanups is. I mean, there's definitely value in it. It's amazing when the fire comes through how hot it gets and the percentage of metal that does get vaporized. But there's still quite a bit of metal left over in a typical house. I mean, that's taking all the fluff and getting rid of it and condensing it down to the other two pieces. And there's definitely recyclables, a lot of recyclables. I mean, I've done houses where I've pulled 20,000-30,000 pounds of scrap metal off the house after the fire has gone through. Cars are very much recyclable after. Unfortunately, it sounds like in Boulder there was nearly 1,300 cars. That's all recycled material. After the insurance company goes through, that is all going to wind up at a shredder. I feel that the amount of tons that actually is going to come off of Boulder is probably going to change our pricing, which is interesting from my business plan standpoint. When I saw that fire taken off and I saw how many houses were being involved, I expected a drop to be coming in the market when that started going.
Right.
My layman's estimate is probably somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 tons of scrap metal will be pulled from that area. And it'll probably get pulled in a relatively short period of time.
Right, which will bring the market down a little bit on scrap because the supply will be higher.
The supply will be higher.
Right.
A lot higher for a short period of time.
Right, and then it'll bounce back up.
And potentially bounce back up unless we oversupply everybody. And then
Sure.
Colorado is in an interesting situation from the standpoint that we have a mill in Pueblo.
Oh, okay.
And so we can ship stuff down to the mill in prepared form, and that makes Colorado fairly unique from the scrap end of the world. Is that we have 5 shredders in the Front Range, and then we have the steel mill in Pueblo. So, hop, skip, and a jump. You can get things to their final destination relatively easily.
So that's very local. It's not like we're packing that stuff up and shipping it to other countries and so forth. I mean, a lot of that gets redone here.
Yeah, most of the steel does not leave the country. All of the major yards in the Front Range have rail lines, and they'll either ship it to Pueblo or wherever. Denver is actually considered a boat ramp because we have such good rail service out of Denver. And so our steel does go all over the country, but it doesn't have to. We have a steel mill in Pueblo, so it just depends on who's paying and who's
buying.
Pueblo makes a certain grade of steel, and if that demand is up, I heard that they made like all the drill rod for oil field, and so when the oil was going crazy, Pueblo had a really big appetite for a certain grade of steel.
Sure, that makes sense.
So they whatever their recipe was to make oil pipe, they were more than happy to buy that stuff. So I'm not exactly sure what else they're making right now. I think they make I-beam, so they make higher
quality steel.
Higher quality steel. Cold rolled steel. I don't think they make any cold rolled steel down there. The big coils that you see on tracks. I think that's from the West Coast. But yeah, Denver is a central hub for a lot of scrap. There's a lot of Wyoming comes to Denver. A lot of even like South Dakota. I did a job in Rapid City, South Dakota, and I wound up shipping everything to Denver. And from there, I actually had 3 options. I could ship over to Chicago, or I could ship over to Idaho. But Denver was just a little bit better on shipping rates, and so I wound up shipping everything to Denver.
Interesting.
There's a lot of material that comes to the Front Range from neighboring states.
Sure, makes sense.
There's a big. We're from my standpoint, we're really lucky with the scrapyards that we have here because
Sounds like it, yeah.
they're very competitive. They like to beat each other up with.
Right. So you get better rates.
I ultimately win when they start beating each other up.
Right.
That's Denver is a unique spot from that perspective.
Interesting. Now, the last talking point that we have here is something you should put down, which is copper is the new oil.
Yeah,
you got to tell me what that means.
I'm running into that more and more as we head towards an electric fueled economy. Then that all has to be transported. All that energy has to be transported, and the primary and the best form is copper. I mean, there's aluminum and brass and all that other stuff that helps, but when it comes down to it, copper is what's all the electric motors are going to be made out of.
Right.
And so we saw in the last 12 months a huge run up in copper, and it's really maintained.
Well, there's just going to be a steady demand.
Yeah, there's going to be a steady demand, and if I had my crystal ball and was able to get it clean enough to see, I'll bet you copper is going to be a pretty amazing market to be in. I've read a number of articles talking about that we may have mined the overwhelming majority. We've mined more than 50% of the copper in the world already. So where are we going to get that copper from? We're going to get it from extension cords. We're going to get it from old stuff that's laying around. And so copper is something that is definitely going to be very volatile, and it's going to be in very high demand. Until somebody comes up with a new formula, copper is it.
Right.
There's a company I'm working with down in Loveland right now that are putting together electric vehicles, 100% electric vehicles, and every time I walk through their facility, it's very clear how much copper plays a role in that whole future.
Sure.
Even if we find some other alternatives like other renewable fuels, copper is still going to be the key to spreading that power. And so copper is the new oil in the long term,
right.
And it'll be a very volatile market as we proceed down this path.
Yeah, very interesting, very interesting. Well, I sure appreciate you being on the show, Shadrach. I really appreciate you being on the show, Shadrach. I give up. I need more coffee. That must be what it is.
Hey, you works.
That's it. Yeah, that does. Hey, you. Thanks for being on the show. Really appreciate it. And again, Scrap Wanted is the name of the company.
Website scrapwanted.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Shadrach.
Yeah.